getting IntelliSense suggestions for your data binding in XAML and making your data binding 8 to 20 times faster. That's all going to be in this video. Hold on. Before we go anywhere, I have another member that has joined my channel as a senior developer. So thank you so much, Michael Muzziviri. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And I don't know, it makes it sound a little bit Italian, but I don't know. Let me know where you come from, Michael. And if you want a shout out for yourself as well, please click that join button down below this video and you can see what it's all about. There's a few tiers that you can join to support my channel and everything that I'm doing, and you will get a couple of perks with that as well. So go check it out, and let's now hop over to continue to that video and show you all the good stuff. So here we are in Visual Studio 2019 for Mac. I'm going to say on the left because I normally say on the left and on the right, but on the right there's nothing there. Well, there's me, of course, but no simulator, no emulator, because actually this video is going to be all code, because this is just a little productivity boost, if you will, to get that IntelliSense up and running and get like the IntelliSense for the binding context that you have behind this code. It has nothing to do with, like, you know, the runtime stuff, so I'm not going to have any demo. It's just going to be code. So here we are in a file new Xamarin.Forms project, and in a previous video where I go from code behind to MVVM, I've talked about, like, you can also enable the IntelliSense for your binding context, because normally, let's just do how we normally do. I actually already created here a main page model which has a my string and a my command, just to have some sample properties in here. And whenever I go to my main page.xaml, actually you would go to like your main page .xaml.cs right here, and we would set here the binding context, right? So set the binding context is main page model. There we go. So now we got, you know, our main page model in there, and we can do the data binding to the properties that are in there. But what it doesn't get us automatically is, you know, if I go here for my label and I say binding, it tells me all kinds of things which, you know, are extensions on the binding. You can do a converter, or you can do a string format, and all these kinds of fancy things. But it doesn't give me the properties of the binding context model. So why not? And that kind of has to do because if you look at like our main page XAML CS right here, our binding context is just a very generic object, right? So you can put everything in here. It's just an object. So it doesn't know, like here in the IDE, here in Visual Studio, it doesn't know what kind of object it is. So it doesn't know how to do the IntelliSense for us. So that is what we have to tell the XAML here. So if we go back to the XAML right here, what you can do is here on this content page, we can say X, and if you remember from other videos, we can specify the XML namespace, right? So X is just the name that you see here. So we can say X DataType. And here we can specify, you can already see all the built-in properties popping up. So absolute layout, animation, this is all Xamarin.Forms stuff, but that's not what we want. We want to have our little local main page right here. So let's define a new XML namespace, and let's name it local. This local name can be anything. And what I have to do here is specify our project name. So for you, this would be something much more normal. I have this naming convention where I do XF binding context IntelliSense sample. For you, it's probably something like my app dot, I don't know, whatever, can be anything. You will figure it out. So this is basically, you can see the namespace. So if you don't know what to put here, you can just look here and see what namespace this is, and that is the one that you should have in there. So now we can reference this through local, and here I can now say for this data type, I can say local, and it should pop up with my main page model, or the app, or the main page, or whatever, but I'm looking for the main page model. So let's put that in here. And now when I go back here to my binding and I start typing again, I'm going to say binding and I do space, and you can see the my command and the my string are in here. So that is pretty cool, right? It suddenly knows, because we specified that this has to be the data type, that it has to look at like the main page model, and it has to get the properties or the methods or whatever you put in there from there and add that to our IntelliSense right here. Now, as if that wasn't even cool enough, this kind of also enables compiled bindings, which are faster than, you know, the regular bindings. Because what normally happens here at runtime, this is going to be parsed and it's going to look like, hey, I have a binding to a certain property, and I'm going to find out at runtime which class that has to come from. Then it's going to do some magic to actually pull that property out there, probably something with reflection, and that is all kind of slow, right? But now we're telling this XAML page to already use this data type right here. So now it knows which class it has to come from, that property is already there, so it can skip over some things, and this will actually give you a performance boost. So that is also something that you get for free. So it's all kinds of good stuff. You could get the IntelliSense, you will get the better performance when you're running this, and also this will give you compile time warning. So if I put something in here, not a property, you can see that this will automatically also, whenever I go here to my project and I build this thing, it should also pop up with like, hey, this is a property that is not on this main page. Here we go. So let's do this here a little bit. And we can say like, hey, property, not a property is not found on the thing that you specified in DataType. So we could also get the errors. So there's no more magic strings in here, no more runtime errors that you can pop up. I think there is a little note here. I'm going to open the documentation page in a little bit because there's a much more elaborate explanation there. But I think one of the things that happens here is that it only points out like the first error for not a property. So if we have another one right here and we say this text is also a binding to another property that doesn't exist, I think it only gives you the error for like the first property that is missing, simply because, see, here you go, of how this stuff works. It actually gives you a little message, it seems, with the errors right here. But anyway, so that is something that you would want to keep in mind, that it only gives you like the first property right here that it doesn't know. But whenever we fix this, so whenever we set this to a property that actually does exist, so I think that is the my string, right, or the my, there we go, and then we build it again. So you have to maybe build it a couple of times to go through all the errors. That's just the way how it works with all this XAML parsing and the IntelliSense. Maybe that will become better over time, I don't know, but that you will still go through all the errors, right? So there's no worry about that. You will fix them all, no worries. It will be handed to you by Visual Studio. Now I'm showing you this in Visual Studio 2019 on a Mac, but of course this also works on Visual Studio on Windows. I think on Windows there's actually the XAML binding error output window, something like that, which gives you even more information. So that is really cool. Now let's quickly hop over to the documentation page for this, because the Xamarin.Forms as a whole has great documentation page, if I may say so myself. There's a lot in here. You can see that on the left, everything is described here. But this is actually under the Xamarin.Forms compiled binding. So that's what I said. You will get the compiled bindings kind of like for free when you're doing this, because data bindings have two main problems. There's no compile time validation of binding expressions. Well, we solved that with this, didn't we? And they aren't cost efficient. Bindings are resolved at runtime using general purpose object inspection, reflection, and the overhead of doing this varies from platform to platform. But if you're really onto that, performance improvements, then this is definitely something that you want to look at. And with simply setting the X data type, that is something that you can do. Now, what is kind of interesting here, let me quickly scroll over this. So this note is kind of important. It's recommended to set the XDataType attribute at the same level in view hierarchy as the binding context. So that means wherever you're going to set the binding context, I set it for the whole page. That's also where you want to set the XDataType. So I also set it for the whole page. And let me actually just go back, because you can also set it here on this stack layout. So I can also say here, I want to set the data type here. So let's set this again to local main page model. There we go. So you can scope it also to certain elements, because what you can also do, maybe you don't even know this, you can also, if I give this stack layout also an X name stack, there we go, I can go to my main page XAML CS and I can also say stack dot binding context is new main page model. Now in the same in this case, it's both the same, but you can have two different things in here. So you can set that binding context per kind of like hierarchy thing that you have in your XAML page, or you can do all of this in code as well. So that is something that you want to keep in mind. Now there is, if you're going to do this, this is a more of an advanced scenario that is typically not really something that you should worry about actually. But if you are going to do that, then you have to be, aware that you have to set that X data type on the right elements as well for it to show up properly. But more importantly, that it works for like the compiled bindings as well. Another important note is that the compiled bindings currently are disabled for any binding expressions that use the source property. So whenever you're going to use that source thing inside of your binding, you're going to point it to a different source. It's hard to pick up from the IDE, so at the time of recording at least, this is not supported, but who knows what might happen in the future. Compiled bindings, I've shown you this. And what is important here also is that it mentions like the binding modes. So you also have, together with the bindings, you can say OneWay or TwoWay or OneWay to source, which is very interesting as well. So let's go back to our XAML page. And if we go back to our binding right here, we can also set the mode right here. So the mode we have default, that is specified by the control, in this case the label, and I think even the property, so the text property on the label is going to set it to you, whatever makes the most sense to the developer that implemented this. But we have like the other things here, so one time, one way to source, and TwoWay. And you really can think here, what am I going to do with this binding? If this label is only going to be set once, you can set it to one time, and it knows that it has to update it from the view model to the view just once, and after that it will stop watching if there are going to be any changes. So that's also a performance gain right there. It will know to only do it once, and after that it's just done. And also you have the one way, so it comes from the view model to the view. So, and each time it changes, it will go from the view model to the view, so it updates automatically. But that has some mechanics behind that to actually update the view. So there is some little overhead there. You also have the other way around, one way to source. So whenever you have maybe an entry control, you can also set the binding from whatever is entered in this entry. I want to send that to the view model, but that's it. It only goes one way. So I just set that, and whenever the property is changed on the view model, we're not going to care about that. We're just going to write it from the entry to the property in the view model. And then you have TwoWay, which does both. So whenever the property is changed on the view model, we will update the control, or whenever the control is updated, we will update the view model. Now this is the most expensive one because it has to figure out like which signals are going which way. So there is a bit of overhead there, and also by specifying this for each control, each binding that you're doing, you might get a performance gain. How much that is, we'll see that in a little bit back in the documentation, but I just want you to know that this is there. And another way, another thing in a data template, so that's kind of also the scope that I mentioned. I have another video on data binding scope that might be relevant here, so it should pop up on your screen, and you can find it down below in the video description, which is very relevant here because this data template, has a scope of one element that is in your item source right here. So you want to set that data type there as well, and again you will get the compiled bindings for that as well, which is really cool. Now one thing, you can mix those things together, and there's one thing that you really want to be aware of also with the view hierarchy. So if you're going to set this on the stack layout or on the page on the highest level, if that's what you've done, then it's going to work for this whole scope. If that's something that you don't want to do, if you want to kind of reset the scope, you can set the X data type to null here for this stack layout that is inside of a stack layout, and suddenly then you can use the binding for this is the classic binding. So you won't get any IntelliSense here, but this will still just work if the bindings are there for the view model that is specified for the whole page. Right, so this is kind of more of an advanced scenario. Please let me know down in the comments if you have any questions. This might be going a little bit too fast, but yeah, this is definitely something that you can do. Now for the performance, I already mentioned it. Compiled bindings that use property change notification, one way to source, or TwoWay. The resolve time is approximately 8 times quicker than a classic binding. 8 times! That is crazy. So if you're really on that performance, this is definitely something that you want to look into. a compiled binding that doesn't use property change notification, so the one time, can be 20 times quicker. There are some other numbers in here, you can read them yourself, but you can get from this that this can be a very big performance gain if you're working with data binding and you get that little in there, the nitty-gritty details, and you tweak that for your performance. This can be a very big win for you. So now that you know about this and now you know how to do it, go out to all of your projects and go apply this. To be very honest, before I did the research for this video, I did not realize that I could make my bindings 8 to 20 times faster by just applying this and tweaking all my data bindings with, the OneWay to source, the TwoWay, doing whatever, and adding that data type to it, enabling the compiled binding. So that is really crazy. I hope your eyes are opened as well, and now you will apply this to all your apps. I mean, it's a little bit of work, but I think it's worth it if you see the performance gain. Let me know if you actually enable this, and if you see your app speeding up. Maybe you even benchmark it and you have some numbers to share. That would be really cool. Please put it down in the comments below so anyone can look at it, or join that Discord server that I have set up. You can find the link in the video description below, because I would be very curious to know. Thank you for watching another one of my videos. I'm sure you've liked each and every one of them, but can I ask you to please like this one as well? If you've actually liked it, subscribe to my channel to be one of those big number of subscribers. It's going towards 8K at the time of recording, which is really crazy. So please do that. And for the rest, I'll be seeing you for my next video. Keep coding.